Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. It's another week has come and gone, and we're going to talk about the books that I have read, the books that I'm currently reading, and what I hope to get to next in this weekly reading update. And I also plan to keep this video a little bit short because I'm just kind of not feeling like talking about books for once. Anyway, also, my son is waiting for me, so I have 12 minutes to film this video. So the first book that I finished is Eragon. This was a reread for me. This is a very much loved book by me. I read this probably 20 years ago, and when I was I think I was maybe like 21, I think, when I read this. And I just adored it. I just loved it. I thought it was so fun. I think that this is I think it's technically a YA. Sometimes it's listed as a middle grade, which I feel like it's kind of a reach. I just love this book so much. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. This was a buddy read that I did with Jen from the Book Refuge, and we just had the best time reading this and talking about it, and it was just so much fun. So the basic premise of this is we have a very normal, it's a fantasy, obviously in a fantasy world, and we have a very normal, common farm boy who comes across a dragon egg, and he doesn't realize it's a dragon egg. He thinks it's just this beautiful shiny rock. He tries to go and barter it or sell it for food for his family because he found it when he was hunting. They're very poor, and nobody will take it because it comes from this area in the mountains that is like almost cursed. Nobody wants anything to do with it. So he takes it home and keeps it. And lo and behold, it hatches and a dragon comes out. A baby dragon comes out, and they bond, and that's when he starts to learn that, okay, he's a dragon rider, and there's this greater world plot about an evil king and how he sort of destroyed all the dragons, and it's just so fun. It's so great. It's very much a coming-of-age story. I love the characters in here. I love Saphira. I think she's just so well done, the dragon. I think Eragon is a very charming hero. He is just, I think, a really good example of a young adult character, in that his reactions are very what I would consider typical for teenagers and how they behave, but not in a way that feels off-putting. Like, there's still a certain amount of charm to him, and I think a lot of that has to do with how earnest and wholesome and how good he is, while he still does these sometimes knee-jerk character reactions that you would expect a very inexperienced teenage boy to do. Like, he loses his temper, he gets his feelings hurt, he does things that maybe put himself and Saphira in danger. But he all sort of does that with this really huge heart, and I think watching him sort of retain that innocence all the way to the very end, even through the losses he's suffered, and as they're like traveling and journeying, and I just loved it so much. And honestly, while there were a few things I saw that right? Like, I love this book so much. I wasn't reading this critically. I just wanted to be swept away in the story. And I was honestly really hoping my critical brain would be off. And it was. Like, there was only like one or two things that I was like, you know. And I also feel like this isn't the type of book that is without criticism, but my enjoyment for this, my memory of loving this, is so strong that I don't really care, you know? So that's how this book is for me. I just love it so much. And I had a great time reading this with Jen, and we're going to be reading Eldest, the second book, together in August, and I had a great time. This is one of those reading experiences I had this year, very similar to when I reread Daughter of Smoke and Bone, that just was comforting and fun, and one of the best reading experiences that I've had this year. So I love it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm also saying I don't think it deserves a lot of the criticism that it gets. I think Christopher Paolini, who wrote this, I think when he was 16, maybe 18, I think he gets a lot of things right that much more seasoned adult authors struggle with. Like, there's really no info dumping in here. It's very natural the way the story is built. I think the characters are really solid and relatable. It's a very familiar but still fresh fantasy world, and I just adore it. I love it so much. So obviously 5 stars for this one, which is interesting because I have a shelf on Goodreads, which is, I joined Goodreads in 2010, and I haven't tracked all of my books on there because there were phases from 2010 to now where I just wasn't actively tracking my reading. But I had this one shelved as before Goodreads, so books I read before I opened my Goodreads account in 2010. And I had originally given this 4 stars, and I bumped it up to 5 this time. And maybe a lot of that is just like right read at the right time with the right friend reading it, and just a sense of nostalgia and just fun and joy. I just loved it. I thought it was really great. I will always love it. 5 stars. Okay, so now the next book that I read is You Were Made to Be Mine by Julie Anne Long. I finally finished the Palace of Rogues series because I had actually started book 6. I had read book 3 a few years ago, and then I went back and read book 1, 2, 4, and 5. And so now I have the whole series completed, and I just love this whole series. If you're looking for a great historical romance series to binge, like, I cannot recommend this enough. It's so fun. Beautifully written, but not in the way that feels at all like purple prose or pretentious. Just a very clever use of words, very clever, witty dialogue, little lines that you're just like, I love that, that's clever. The writing just flows. It's just so much fun. I just love this series. The romances are so swoony. I love how she writes her heroes. I just love everything about it. And the found family aspect of this series specifically is phenomenal. This is going to be like one of those series that I probably reread over and over again. Like, it's just so comforting to me. I need to get all the paperbacks. I love this series. This book is probably possibly tied for my favorite with book number 6. So this one is basically about our heroine, who is a French lady, and she's engaged to an earl. And the hero is actually a British spy master who was imprisoned by the French because he was caught spying and things like that. So once he gets out of prison, the earl, who he knew previously, asks for his services to track down his fiancée, our heroine, the French girl, who had run away with some jewels that he gave her, and he wants her found. So that's our romantic pairing. We have this ex-convict who was wrongly imprisoned, spy master, who's trying to find our beautiful French heroine with a heart of gold, who is trying to escape a very tragic event that occurred by her fiance to her. So, trigger warning, I'm going to mention really quickly, so if you don't want to hear the trigger warning, you can mute me really quickly. But trigger warning for off-page sexual assault. That's a really big theme here, but I felt like it wasn't heavy. In my opinion, my reading of it, it didn't feel heavy, it didn't feel like we dwelled in there, it wasn't graphically depicted, but it is a big part of this story, so if that is something that bothers you, just be aware of it going into it. But I absolutely loved the structure of this story. I felt like it was so gripping and compelling because there's also this added emphasis on the plot, which is our hero is trying to figure out how he got imprisoned, and he believes there's a connection with the Earl, that he was doing something with the French, and he's trying to prove that. So there's this added mystery element, but the relationship in here, while it is a very slow burn, and honestly our couples, they don't even meet until we're like 30% of the way into this book. But even then, like, I was so invested in this story. Julianne Long is a gifted storyteller. She's a beautiful writer. She knows exactly how to draw out the tension just enough. And while I definitely wouldn't call her books spicy, I think book 4 is probably the spiciest book of them all. I think they're just peak romance, in my opinion. I just love them so, so, so much. I adored this book. I loved the romantic pairing. I loved the characters. I loved the found family. I loved the plot. I honestly have zero critiques of this book. I gave it 5 stars, and really the only reason I did that is because I kind of wanted a little more of their time together, because a lot of this book is they're not together because they're trying to figure out what's happening, and she's got a lot to unpack with her assault that happened to her. But it's just absolutely beautiful. I have zero critiques of this. It's 5 stars. I mean, I loved it so much. I'm trying to decide, is it actually a 6 star? I just enjoyed the whole series. I really want to go back and reread for the 3rd time book number 3, and I want to take my time with it because I know I will like that book. I just feel like maybe I came into it with some preconceived biases that were coloring my opinion of it, because I've literally loved every single book in this series. Every single book except for that one was 5 stars for me. So I'm like, it just seems sort of odd that I had one that was such a big miss for me when all of the other ones have been like, knock it out of the park. Anyway, I adored it. I would highly recommend this series if you want to read a historical romance and you haven't yet. If you're going to do the romance readathon in August, the first book is a widow romance. And you could read the whole thing. You could read the whole series, because it's all out now. I don't think it's finished. Book 6 doesn't... I don't believe it's finished. I don't know for sure. I hope it's not, because I just love it so much. So, okay, those are the only 2 books that I actually finished. So now let's talk about the books that I'm currently reading. So I kind of struggled for a while to find what I wanted to read, because I read the Julianne Long series. I have all of them on my Kindle. I picked them up as they came up on sale, and then I paid full price, like $8 for one of them, which I kind of hate to do for a Kindle book, but I love the series so much, and I know it's one that I will reread, so I'm happy to buy that. But So I kind of picked up a few books and then set them aside because they weren't really gelling for me. So the book I decided to stick with was one that is featured in the summer read-along with Seasonally Booked Up. Seasonally Booked Up is an excellent book club if you're looking for really good discussions that you can do in text format. It's run over on Discord. There, you can find them on Instagram. I think it's Bookish Kelly who does it, and Dana Crawford, To All the Nerdy Girls. Like, I've played a part in their read-alongs before. I've always enjoyed the books they've picked, and the discussions have been great. It's been a while since I've read with them, and I kind of wanted to talk about books with them again. And while I haven't really taken part in the discussion this time because I'm a much slower reader, I'm way behind their daily schedule. I just, my reading time is pretty much in the middle of the night when I am an insomniac. And so I'm not quite caught up to where they are yet. But this whole summer is I think it's like the summer of STEM. So all of them are about women in STEM. And I really have only read Ali Hazelwood's books that are women in STEM. So I was excited. And this one, I honestly I had no expectations of this book. It's Earthbound. It's by 2 authors. And I'm 65% of the way into it right now. It's a fairly short book. I'm absolutely loving it. It's so freaking good. I've been doing a little book chat on Instagram. So I've been pulling out quotes from this and then adding a little bit of commentary if you're following along in there. But I just absolutely love it. So the basic premise is our heroine is a computer scientist and our hero is an engineer. He hires her because they're trying to, it's set in Houston, Texas in 1961 and 62. So it's very much about who's going to put the first man on the earth. So it feels very much like a race with Russia and other countries. And so our hero Parsons hires our heroine Charlie, who is a very beautiful woman, and she's extremely brilliant, and she really uses that beauty as an armor and a way to get her. She uses that almost as a weapon too, to progress in her career, but she's incredibly smart and intelligent, and I just love their relationship, how they had this attraction, but they definitely were like not acting on it until one moment they did, which started in like this physical affair. And they promised each other, we're not going to talk about this at work ever. We're not going to talk about work when we're together here. And so you sort of see both sides of their relationship like that, how professional they act and how they start to have moments where they feel tenderness or their physical feelings bleed into their working relationship. And it's just so good. I think it's very clever, really well written, just fantastic. I can't wait to keep reading it. It's the type of book that right now, I just want to be reading it. Like, I don't want to stop reading it, but, work and things like that. So it's fantastic. So then the only other book that I have been reading this week, let me see if I can find my spot where I'm at. Sorry for the interruption and probably a different location. Once again, my memory card was full. So the only audiobook I've been listening to this week, once I finished Eragon, is A House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is a reread for me. I mean, I've read everything Sarah J. Maas has written, except for that one YA Catwoman book. I definitely, while I love all of her books, I love her storytelling, she's definitely an author that I can see and hear criticism about, definitely. And in a way that doesn't feel like an attack, like it doesn't feel like a personal attack, because I recognize the flaws while still really enjoying her stories and her books and her worlds and everything. So when I first read this, I read this in March of 2020, right as soon as it came out. I was so excited, and I had just come off of a reread of Throne of Glass and ACOTAR, the whole series. So I had just reread all of her books when I picked this up, and, read it when everybody else did when it first came out, and it took me forever to get through. And I remember reading this, originally I gave it 4 stars, and I remember feeling like, this is really slow, like, wow. And at the time, like, I wasn't super critical of it. I was just hoping for the storytelling that I had come to associate with her as an author. And I wasn't getting that for a while. So I was kind of curious to see what I would think of this, 3.5 years later, with a lot more critical of an eye reading this. So I started this on the audio. And I also think that may be helping too, because I read this physically the first time. But I will say that the beginning of this, the first 5.5 chapters, are almost completely unnecessary as a beginning. I'm not saying they're unnecessary information. I am kind of shocked, honestly. I am kind of shocked that we had 5.5 chapters of nothing happening and info dumping, basically. The initial event, the inciting event, doesn't happen until 5.5 chapters in. And that just seems like, for an author who is such a seasoned author with both fantasy and just fiction, I just am sort of like bamboozled as to how that happened, you know? And obviously, to be fair, this is definitely a much more complex world and story that she's telling compared to Throne of Glass or ACOTAR. But I sort of am of the opinion that that is absolutely unnecessary to have in the beginning of a book. You know, if this had been any other author that I picked up for the first time and I didn't have such a history of knowing I like their storytelling, I would have DNF'd it for sure. So I find it just almost inexcusable to have such info dumping in the beginning, and it is info dumping. That's not to say that you can't enjoy it. That's not to say that you didn't notice it. That's not to say any of that. It is definitely info dumping. And that's the thing about like fantasy. When you're opening a book in a fantasy world, you have to do a certain amount of info dumping in some way, whether that's through characters talking, whether that's through just nothing but exposition, whether that's literally through just internal thoughts, which is what's happening here. But, you know, you've got to get your readers to know how this world works. But I do feel like it's honestly almost inexcusable how much info dumping is here. Now, do I still enjoy this book? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do I still love this story? Yes, 100%. Look at me. I've got my Jelly Jubilee ponies shirt on. I love Crescent City. I just feel like, to me, it felt like this was a first draft she was writing, and she was working out the world in her head on paper, and then it never got edited. It feels like an exploratory draft. And I just sort of feel like, for an author with that much experience, who let her do that? You know, like, who let her do that? And I'm also not saying that the information she gave isn't going to be necessary at some points in the story. Like, it is. Like, as I was reading that, I was like, okay, yeah, that definitely is needed information. But is it needed in the first of the book? No, it's not. So, like, I'm saying this criticism with love because I adore Sarah J. Maas's books. I really do. I love her stories. I love her storytelling. I think she really has a gift for storytelling. I really do. And that's probably why I was so disappointed, because the storytelling element was not there. We weren't getting any real character development or building. We were just getting very isolated incidents of our characters, you know, like getting drunk at parties, whatever, and a ton of world information, which we have no frame of reference for, and which isn't moving the story forward, and which isn't really telling us about the characters at all. So I'm just sort of like, I don't understand why anybody... I don't understand. But, I mean, again, like, I really love it. So now where I'm at... And we can criticize the things we love, right? This is not a reflection on anybody's personality. This is just me saying, hey, I noticed this, and like, what the heck? So now I'm on chapter 28, that far into it, and I think probably for the last 10 chapters, I stopped noticing the info dumping as much. It's not coming up as much. We're now finally getting into the heart of the story. But, I mean, that's about 200 pages in. That's requiring an awful lot of trust from your readers to go that far without really having a story or a reason for people to be reading, you know? Nobody really picks up fiction, I mean, maybe some people do, with the hopes that it's going to read like a fantasy history book, you know? I mean, except for that one George R. R. Martin book, which I read and adored last year. But I just feel like... Sarah J. Maas, I really like this book, I really like this series, but, like, I just can't get over what in the world, you know? Anyway, so I don't want to be too negative about it, and I don't feel like I am, because, like I've said, I still love enjoy this book, but also something that I did is I was so curious to see, like, compare the opening sequences of her other series. So once I finally got to the inciting incident, which was like 5.5 chapters in, then I went back to Throne of Glass and listened to the first inciting incident, not just chapter, and I did the same with ACOTAR. And those both have such a clear, precise storytelling, character building beginning that this one really lacks. And it's not that it's adult fantasy, right? That's not it at all. There are plenty of adult fantasy authors who do not do this. Brandon Sanderson doesn't do this, you know. Even Patrick Rothfuss doesn't do this. Juliette Marillier doesn't do this. She does at times, but not to this level. It's just very interesting to me how she did that and how different that it was. Specifically how different the inciting incident, the thing that's going to motivate you to want to keep reading. Anyway, I talked longer than I wanted to. So yeah, that's what I'm reading. That's it. That's all. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, please feel free to leave me a rainbow, because I'm sitting in front of my window with some really pretty cling film on it, and it has rainbows shining through. So, and I'll see you all in my next video.